I was saying we were talking about accuracy, okay, and we had just before described what is precision, okay, and both are measures on how close is a set of clock, in one case among themselves. I mean, a group of clocks is close among themselves, and we call precision this concept. When instead of taking a couple of local clocks, we take a local clock and the clock Z, and we measure the distance, we can say that the accuracy of a group of clocks is determined by the maximum offset between the Z and, let's say, the clock in the group which is more far apart to Z. Consequence is that if we have a group of clock which have a precision P, then we say which have an accuracy A, then we can also say that among them they have a precision P which is 2A. It's twice the distance from the local clock, because this maximum distance can be, one clock can be far ahead and one clock can be behind, and so the distance becomes double. So I was also observing that when we talk of precision, we have to relate the groups of clocks, and so normally we require distributed algorithms in order to limit or to ensure the precision in a group of clocks. When we talk about accuracy, we don't need any more distributed protocols, because each clock is going to correct itself based on the value of Z. So I ask Z and I adjust myself according to Z. Fatima asks Z and say adjust the clock based on the value of Z. So we don't need to interact within us. I don't need to send any message to anybody in order to make this clock correction. Okay, and in this sense, we can scale to very huge set of clocks, because the actions is from, I mean, each single clock has only to interact with the source of time, which is Z. Good. How can a clock evolve in time? You see, as we said, the perfect clock is the one moving on this line. We have a precision, which is the, let's say, maximum distance between any two clocks. We have accuracy, which is the maximum distance from the perfect clock. We explained what is drift, and we can also speak about clock synchronization. In general, clock synchronization is a process by which we go and adjust the dynamics of a clock in order to get or to maintain it closer either to the group or to Z. And clock synchronization algorithms are really many, very different among themselves, and we can list really hundreds of them. But to us is important the process. I can act on a clock or a group of clock with an algorithm or a distributed algorithm and obtain the effect that the values of the clocks are corrected. In fact, you can see that I have this clock. At this point, I understand that I'm diverging, and then I can make correction on the clock itself. The oscillator, physical oscillator, is always the same, but I can, let's say, multiply the number of ticks by something smaller or greater than 1 in order to adjust the speed of the clock, and so to get close to here. You see here we have these two dashed lines. they represent a bound in the clock drift. Okay, and this is a fundamental assumption if we want to make all these things possible. Because if I cannot assume that a clock has a maximum drift, then I don't know how frequently I have to run my correction algorithm or process. If I know that my clock can take 10 seconds per hour and I want to be close at most 1 second, I can run my algorithms every 6 minutes. Because my clock can take 10 minutes per hour. If I don't have any bound on how fast the clock can diverge from the correct time, I should be running these algorithms all the time. No interval would guarantee me that I would not pass the 1 second threshold. Okay? So this is a fundamental assumption for having a deterministic clock synchronization, because it allows us to predict the maximum deviation after a given amount of time. Okay? Fine. If we have unsynchronized local physical clocks, then you can see that a timestamp is the value of a clock which is attached to some event or message or something. A timestamp can only be related if they originate from the same clock. Okay? If I am a process with my clock, there is an event, I attach to it a timestamp. We explained that is the value of the clock just after the event is observed. If later I have to consider this timestamp, this makes sense only in this process because the clock that I use is the same. And so I can, how to say how long ago this happened. But clearly, I cannot use a timestamp taken with a clock somewhere else, because the local time of this somewhere else can be completely unrelated to the local time of the guy who took the timestamp. To make an example is, suppose that we all have watches, but we are not synchronized together. So Fatima does something and writes attached to this something the value of her watch when she has done. And then she put something in the envelope and the postman is coming to give me this message. I open the message and I see that Fatima made these things at this value of her clock. How long ago it was? If I don't have her clock and I have only my clock, I cannot say. Okay? So if I look the timing information that she has taken, this can be related only on her clock, not on everybody else's clock, if we cannot make any statement about how synchronized are the clocks. Clear? So it's not a problem to evaluate an interval of time between two events in the same process, because we use the same clock and the clock may be not perfect, it can have some drift, but more or less in short interval this can be very, very negligible. Say, if I measure 1 second and my drift is 10 to the minus 6, I'm wrong of 1 millionth of second, more or less. Okay, I can live with that. But what we would like to do is also to evaluate distributed time interval durations. When I say a distributed time interval duration is a an interval in which the starting and the ending event, which delimit the interval, are happening or are taken in two different places by two different clocks. Say, how long does it take a data packet to travel the internet from Japan to here? I can take a timestamp when the packet is sent in a machine in Japan, and I can observe the arrival of the packet in a machine here. So the two events are in two different places. Okay? How can we measure distance between local events? Easy. Round trip time? Easy. How can I measure the round trip time? I send a message to Fatima, I wait the response from Fatima, and I measure the time from my first sending between these. The most relevant or the most simple example is one-way delay of a packet sent over a complex network, for example, but it is not obviously the only one. So, local duration, fine. Local physical clock, the drift rate is normally insignificant. I mean, the degree of error is so small that we don't care. And local clocks can be taken for measuring round trip duration. You see, from A to B, there are two events happening on P, and I use P clocks for this kind of measure. We can also, with some algorithmic support, try to measure distributed durations. Okay? We have, what the exercise we are trying to do now is to understand how we could measure distributed event if we don't have a global time, but we have only local clocks. And the only assumptions that we make, they have a limited drift rate. Apart that, they can have any kind of value. So we can use chains. Okay, we want to evaluate the delay of message M1. See, message M1 is this one. If we have a recent message M0 sent in the opposite direction, okay, we can close the loop. Because we can say that process Q knows TQ1 minus TQ0. TQ1 minus TQ0. This is a local measure, easy to take. And also P knows TP1 minus TP0, so knows this interval. So we know the big one here and the shorter one here. And P can send back this information with message M1. Okay, in the same message I can carry also this kind of information. So, I don't know D0. I know, however, that D0 is greater than a minimum time necessary for transmitting packets on my network. Normally, given the technology, I can derive a minimum time. So what I can say, I can make some inference here, and I can say that the duration of M1 is less or equal than the big interval here minus the short interval minus Tmin. And this is an upper bound for this duration. Okay. Another, if I don't want to have an upper bound but just a rough measure, I could take this interval minus this interval and divide by 2. if I don't have any reasons to expect that M0 was faster or slower than M1, I can take the sum of the two and divide by 2. Okay, so I can derive some of these observations. Okay, we can apply similar methods to assess distributed durations between two events, E1 and E2. The seminal paper by Flavio on this probabilistic clock synchronization. But we commit an error which is between 0 and G, which is the variance in the delay of messages. Okay? If we don't have anything more than local clocks, we can use exchanging messages, but this is what we somehow are forced to do. Okay. And this is not too far from the problem of synchronizing clocks with NTP. Okay, how does it work? I don't know how many of you are familiar with NTP, the network time protocol, which is used over the internet to distribute time to all the connected machines. You have server of level 0, 1, 2, 3, depending on how high you are in the rank and so how much precise is your time. So you normally set up the protocol by identifying a server of a good level, and then at some point you ask the server what time is it. The server answers with his time, and from this information you are going to adjust your clock. But you cannot know with certainty which will be or which have been the delay of the two messages. The first message is a request and the second message is the response. It contains timing information of that server, which means a timestamp taken by the server of level 0. But then when it comes to you, you have this value. You have your clock, you measure the round trip time of request and response, and somehow you have to adjust. And depending on how slow is the network, the bigger is the error you still commit even if you synchronize. Especially if the network is unbalanced, so one way is much lower or slower or faster than the other, again you get very bad synchronization results. And in fact, when you have network instability, the precision of the clock synchronization is not as good as when you have, let's say, network completely stable and completely deterministic. See, no, forse? And say, given all these difficulties, is a strong motivation to say we need, or we would be extremely happy if we had a global time. Okay? Global time, what does it mean? That we have a single reference clock Z, that is, say, super. If Z is available, all time measurements could be made by using Z. Every event, I take the value of the clock Z for this event, and I don't have any problem. But it should be available everywhere and always. Okay. In this sense, Z would act as a global time base, a common global time base. Okay. Again, in a distributed system, a system of systems, whatever, any infrastructure you take, local clocks are kept synchronized in order to generate a common notion of time, a global time. If the set of clocks are bounded to be close enough to each other, we can take any of these as a representative and approximation of the global time. If the approximation is good enough, we are happy with this. Okay? So the global time is an abstract notion which is approximated by the local clocks of. So I think I have a global time, but still I use my clock to timestamp the events. Fatima thinks that she has a global time, but uses her local clocks. The issue is, if these local clocks are close, sufficiently close to each other, we get a good approximation of this global time. Why we would be happy having a global time notion? If I had a dependable global physical time, I would really be using it for the backbone infrastructure of a system of systems. Why? I could correctly interpret all the timestamps across all the diverse constituent systems. Because any timing information would be a real timing information, not as before when the timestamp provided by Fatima didn't have any sense if I had only my clock. If I can assume that their clock is sufficiently close to mine, I can use this timing information in proper terms. So I can control and synchronize the duration of physical time frames. I can make a TDMA if I have a global clock notion. Otherwise, what does it mean, TDMA? Time division multiplexing. When its participant knows that it's his own turn to transmit and or which other component is transmitting in any fraction of time. They must have all the same time frame. For that you need synchronized clock. Specify temporal properties of the interfaces. I mean, all the guys joining these interfaces might have the same perception, but this requires they have the same clock. Synchronize input and outputs. This is trivial. Synchronize stigmergic and message-based information. I receive messages. I receive a sensor signal, and I must be able to put them in a timeline altogether. I can make a resource allocation in a time, say in a conflict-free basis. For example, using time-triggered or TDMA or round-robin kind of stuff. I can detect errors. There are very strong results, because say in a distributed system where I have the notion of global time, and I can ensure that messages either take a finite amount of time or they are lost, I can use this clock, this notion of time, to make very early error detection. Because I know when I have to expect things. If things don't happen, then I have the perception that something wrong happened. And also, I can strengthen security protocols. We were making an example in the previous days. For a simple example, in many security strategies of many banks, provide you a small key which is changing numbers every few seconds, 30 seconds or something. And when you want to make some operation over the net, say home banking, and you make an operation and the bank asks as a confirmation the number which is appearing on your small machine. But the clock of the machine, the small machine you are given, and the clock of the bank must be synchronized. Because if this information changes every 30 seconds, when you input a number, the bank must know which time interval is the small machine doing, and so can check whether the number you provided is correct. If the clock were not synchronized, would be very high. I mean, you couldn't use this kind of mechanism. Okay, so global time favors also the development of this kind of security stuff. This, most of you know. We have different types of time. UTC, is the Universal Time Coordinated, is an astronomical time standard, and this is the basis for, let's say, a calendar clock. What time is it? We normally take that. But say in 1972, it was agreed that the second, as defined by the UTC, was not sufficiently precise, sufficiently correct, was not good enough, and the decision was to move to the TIE standard. Next slide, I will tell you exactly what is the standard. So, why this change? Because if we take the second on defined by UTC, in order to keep aligned with the astronomical say flow of events progression, we need to adjust a second from time to time. So the UTC second is not a sub-multiple precise of the periods, for example, of the year and so on. We would be following UTC, we would take much more, but we would be in the same situation as the Julian calendar, which was used in the Middle Ages, which was still used in Russia and these countries. You know that the October Revolution happened in November. This is 2 weeks changed. If we use UTC, in some thousand years, we would be 2 weeks far apart from the, let's say, astronomical seasoning and progress. Because we have to change the number of seconds in an hour, and in some cases, we have to insert a leap second. At some point, we say, put there another second, which has no duration, but it's just for the counts. And clearly, for managing time in computers, having this discontinuity in the timeline is unacceptable. Because I will never be able to say if something happened just before or just after the leap second. And in some cases, some event is observed after the leap second, and in some cases is observed before the leap second, and at the end I will have big troubles, right? So we have big problems with the leap second, and so the decision was to move to the TIE, International Atomic Time, Temp Atomique International. Actually, the acronym is from French. And in this standard is a physical standard, no more an astronomical one. And the second is defined as the duration of a huge number that you can read over there, of periods of the radiation of a specified transition of the cesium atom 133. Okay, I've taken this, boom, that's the second. And TIE is a chronoscopic scale. We don't need to make any leap second kind of stuff. I mean, very straight, continuous, no discontinuities. It defines epoch origin of time measurement with this standard in January 1st, 1958 at 000. It increases as a counter as time progresses, and then when it repeats every 10 years or something like that, if I remember correctly, but it's no big deal on how, what is the period by which you start counting again from zero. So this is what we have in front of us, and here are the requirements for a sound, a good global time base. Global time base have to have no discontinuities, so it must be really a continuous line, even at the points of free synchronization. What does it mean? That even I have a imperfect clock. I am a human. I have human-made stuff. They are imperfect. From time to time, I want to measure my distance from Z. I may find that my clock is a bit far apart from Z, but I cannot sum or subtract some value from my counter. I need to continue by improving or changing the drift. So I need to move towards the correction in a smooth way, but not by jump. Okay. Then I need to have known precision. I need to fix an epsilon, which is my precision, and this must be known. The guarantee that my clock is within this epsilon precision must be very high, 10 to the minus 9 or 10 or whatever, in the highest level of standard. And we have to have a metric of the physical second. So the metric of the physical second is Z, in how the Z we choose. And all these three properties are what we have to realize or to implement by the clocks, which can together then constitute the abstraction of global time base. We want what we call a reasonableness condition. A global time T, I mean, it's not difficult to make a global time T. Depends how useful it will become, okay? But in any case, it must be reasonable. By reasonable, here we intend that all local implementations of the global time, so all the local clocks which are participating to this abstraction, have to satisfy the following condition, which relate the global granularity G of the macro tick and the precision P of the clocks. Okay? What does this mean? We already know what is precision. Given a set of clock, we said the precision is the maximum distance between any two. And given a clock, we also know what means granularity. Granularity is how big is a tick. I can have a clock which has a granularity 1 hour, 1 second, 1 millisecond, 1 nanosecond. Z has 10 to the minus whatever we want. What we want is that the error, the distance between two clocks must be less than 1 tick of the global clock. Okay? And the synchronization error being less than the duration between two micro tick has some very fundamental property. I mean, a way out is I make my clock synchronization. I see that I can reach a period 1 microsecond. So I think, well, I can use a global clock with a granularity of 3 microseconds. Okay. But if we are able to do that, really we can do very important thing. Say, G is the granularity of the macro tick, while pi is the precision between any two clocks here. So if we satisfy this condition, we can then say that if a single event E is detected in parallel by P1, P2, and P3, which have local clocks obeying this property, the timestamp taken by these nodes for E can differ by at most 1 tick. If I'm a bit earlier, I can measure it here. If I'm a bit slower, I will measure it here. But it will never be the case that P3 measures the event here and P1 measures the event there. Because this would mean that its precision, which would be the distance between the two, is higher than the granularity. Okay? You got this? If the distance is less than G, it will never happen that for a single event, two clocks have a distance, the timestamp have a distance bigger than 1 tick. Say, an event happens at a given point in time measured by Z. That's this. Then the issue becomes our clocks, how much they count when the event starts. If I measure if the event happened at my eth tick of the global clock, Fatima's clock can be I minus 1 or I plus 1. Her clock cannot be at I plus 2 or I minus 2, because this would mean that the difference between her clock and my clock would be higher than the granularity, higher than G. Okay, and this is fundamental. Okay, if we have this abstraction, the values of the timestamp taken by any clock, by any observer, can differ from another for at most 1 tick. Okay. What does it mean, 1 tick? Okay. Because some of you may say, this guy is crazy. He's speaking and speaking and speaking for having 1 tick difference instead of 2. What's wrong? Okay. This is here the important is that normally what we want to do is to reconstruct the temporal order of the events. Okay. And if the difference between 2 events is only 1 tick, we cannot say anything of which of the 2 happened before. But if the difference between the timestamp of 2 events taken in any different parts of the world are of 2 ticks, at least are 2 or more ticks, well, then we can reconstruct the temporal order of the events. Because if 2 events have associated 2 timestamps which are different by at least 2 units, we can say that the one with the oldest timestamp happened before the one with the other, independently of which clock made this timestamp. Okay, so this is the key for us to reconstruct the temporal order of events in a global system, worldwide. Okay, any two clocks in this which participate, say any two local representative of the global time can take timestamps, and whichever two are, if the difference is too big, then we can say that the order is really older and the period is really newer. Examples. If I have events which differ from one tick, I cannot say much. Here we have the event, this is the event, it happens at instant 17 of Z and is measured 2 by clock J. You see, J already had his tick here because he's a bit ahead, and is measured 2. So events 17 is timestamp 2 by J. Events 41 here is measured 3 by K. K is slower than Z. Okay, so here I have events which are, you see, 24 Z units far apart, and in my watch are only 1. Here, event 66 is measured 7 by J, and 69 is measured 6 by K. In this case, if I would take this as absolute and perfect measure, I would say that event 69 happened before event 66. Okay? And say these clocks are relatively precise, but not absolutely precise. Only Z allows me to say who is come first and how much. But with this kind of abstraction, I can easily measure distributed duration. Because, again, what is a distributed duration? It's an interval of time which is delimited by 2 events, start and terminating events, which can happen in any part of my system. Synchronization and digitalization errors affect the measurement. We said that the sum of these errors is less than 2G because we have a reasonable condition. So, what we can infer from this that the true duration of the interval, the one that Z would tell us, well, is bounded between our observed duration, in the difference taken by our clocks, minus 2G, and the difference taken by our clocks, plus 2G. Okay, so I can give tight bounds to, let's say, distributed measurement, because this will be limited by twice the granularity of my clock. Suppose, and this is reasonable, that I can make a global clock with, let's say, a granularity of 1 millisecond. Okay, any duration that I measure, I can commit 2 microseconds of error. okay, which is I'm not even able to understand how many times better than what we were doing before with our upper bound approximation. Okay. Here is the same example as before. The two events were 16 and 41. We have a duration of 1. And the real stuff would be 1 minus 2, which is non-reasonable, and 1 plus 2, which is 3. Real duration is 25. It's 15. 25. The other case, we have 46 and 21. We measured 4. Minimum is 2 and maximum is 6. What you see is that the real difference is 25. Okay. And these are very short duration because they are not so far from our tick. Okay. If we go to much longer interval, you see that these two ticks becomes almost irrelevant. So at this point, we can make the statement that if the difference between the timestamp of two events is equal or greater than 2 ticks, then the temporal order of event can be recovered. If I have a stream of events and observation of some files of a trace of events, and the timestamps taken with a global reasonable time base makes these events far apart one in another from 2 or more ticks, I can completely reconstruct the temporal order of the events. Clearly, to maintain all of this, I have to make so that the external synchronization, okay, is performed in a way that, let's say, my local clock is corrected to be maintained into, let's say, half P. As we said, the precision, which means less than half the granularity of the global time. This is the real condition. Okay. If I want the granularity of 1 microsecond, my clock must be at most half microsecond far from real time. This gives me also a requirement on the clock, because actually, if you think that you are doing your system of system and you want this global time base, you can also, while designing the system, trying to understand what is a satisfactory granularity for your clock. In some cases, the granularity must be microseconds. Depending on your system, granularity can also be 1 second. Okay? So once you have defined what is the required granularity, then you have a requirement for the accuracy, and then you have say your target, your objective for the external synchronizations to this. Last slide. Time base is dense if events occur at any point in the timeline. Okay. But again, designing a system, I can restrict the occurrence of events to some active intervals of duration epsilon, with an interval of silence of duration delta between any two active intervals. And this would be a time base which is epsilon delta sparse or sparse. Suppose now that I constrain my system to have one active cycle tick, macro tick, and then one silence. Then everything which is observed is either in the same tick or with a distance of 2, which will satisfy our constraint before. To say, if I separate the timeline by putting some silence is micro intervals in that, I can easily do this. What's next? Next is a short description of what we did with time in Amadeus. After all this reasoning, in this theoretical reasoning, we wanted to design and develop a resilient fail-silent master clock, okay, which is based on satellite-based time synchronization, and we built a prototype which has been patented of a resilient master clock, which is really able to act as a local clock in a system of systems in which we are going to implement a reasonable global time base, with all the measures for keeping it close to the real time and so on. So there are sensors, low power consumption, because we never know where the clock is to be used, low weight and low cost, COTS hardware, and almost everything COTS software. So we want to keep at minimum what we had to do specifically. Okay, the resilient master clock is needed for all these reasons that you know, now you know better than me. And also we wanted to use this resilient master clock as a unit capable of broadcasting a reference time which is available, which is secure, and which is fail-safe. And actually this thing is serving time, can serve time to a constituent system, but can act also as the master of the clock of the time for a local area network, because we are also implementing the 1588 clock. So basic idea is to have independent oscillators, GPS device to get the time, complemented by an acceptance test and software clock control facilities. The idea is that either I can provide the time within the bound specified, or I give up. I say the time is not precise enough, and we have a failure. Still, we detect that the time is not good. And we provide the self-estimation of the quality of the clock synchronization through these algorithms, these things that was done by us in Firenze before Amadeus. And also the idea is to extend the holdover period of the clock, compensating local clock deviations in case GPS signal or the source time is not available. I said temperature, pressure are all influencing the oscillator. So if I have the availability of a GPS, I can synchronize with the GPS often enough, and even if I have a drift, the more often I synchronize, the closer I remain. But suppose you are driving under the Mont Blanc tunnel. You are some 1,000 meters under the ground and no GPS signal available for you take half an hour to drive there. So the clock is equipped with sensor and some algorithms by which if I feel the temperature rising, I slow down the clock. If the temperature is rising, I slow down. If the temperature is freezing, I accelerate the clock. So I try to compensate this external factor so that even if I stay for a long period without the possibility to synchronize with that, I can be more precise. And I make a self-estimation of my distance from Z. If the distance is too high, I give up. This is more or less the objective. And also, this prototype is compatible with the 1508 PTP, so is able to act as the master clock for a local network. You can synchronize with this machinery a set of local computers connected to the network because the PTP prescribes that every 2 seconds the master clock sends the precise signal. If I have a precise clock and every 2 seconds I send it, all the local clocks can be synchronized to microsecond kind of precision. Reliable and self-aware clock. Well, we monitor the synchronization level of the local clock with respect to the global time reference. And when there are deviations, is a statistical method which tries to guess which will be the next value after having observed the series. So anytime there is a synchronization, we compute the offset between the local clock and TIE. And if the things is smooth, we can provide stronger confidence. If there are variations in this offset, then we come conservative and we provide, let's say, larger interval for confidence. The mechanism is more or less the following. We consider the concept of synchronization uncertainty. How sure are we that our time value is close to TIE? So we make a conservative evaluation of the offset at any point in time. We have an accuracy, which is a requirement. And you see, our estimation, UT, the uncertainty, is greater or equal than the offset and is kept smaller than the required accuracy. When UT becomes bigger than the accuracy, then we give up, because we are no more providing a guarantee that the time base is reasonable. Here you see the behavior of several clocks and the awareness of the quality of synchronization. You see, this is the time we are measuring, and the clock slowly gets disciplined according to real time. A perfect clock would follow, in this case, this line. And this is the uncertainty that we can provide. What is the uncertainty? We can say that the probability that the real time is between the higher bound and the lower bound is higher than 10 to the whatever you want. You fix the limit. Obviously, the higher is the limit, the bigger is the upper bound and the lower bound. And you see that if the clock is very smooth and precise and nothing happens, at the end we are providing you almost say, with very high probability in a very small interval. If the time here has oscillation, you see here a small oscillation which expand the confidence interval, because we are no more sure what happens if, since we are observing oscillating and deviating behavior. So we had done a lot of experiments with these kind of things, trying to monitor several real oscillators from real PCs, and more or less we found this kind of behavior. And these are the clocks of 4 different PCs of the same type. Okay, simply the oscillator were more stable or not, and they provided this kind of oscillation. Then deviations can be, as we said, caused by physical environment and so on. So we have all these corrections techniques, and here now I'm close to conclude. This is the overall architecture of this prototype. It's an off-the-shelf hardware board. There's a CPU with an external oscillator, Ethernet modules, GPIO pins for external sensors, and Linux embedded. Software, there's the code for the PTP, the clock synchronization and adjustment mechanism, the reliable and self-aware clock, which is the set of corrections that we said, and the control mechanism for the backup. So here you see more or less the architecture. And essentially, GPS is providing the synchronization, temperature and other sensors through a controller, and the RSI clock are going to correct and discipline this clock. Here we have the CPU, and then a checker to make sure that the time confidence is sufficient, and then this time is ready to be sent over with PTP. So it has been developed, and here important, the checker is in charge of changing the role of the resilient master clock, if it is active or not, with respect to the synchronization uncertainty provided to respect the reasonableness condition. If I have a reasonableness condition that tells that my accuracy must be lower than a given threshold, if I am confident that this accuracy is respected, I become active and I distribute the time. If I'm not, I refrain from distributed time. I try to synchronize and to discipline my clock until the point, again, that I can provide this guarantee. But this way, say, in a system, we are providing a very important function, timing function, because either the constituent system works aware of being on the time dimension respecting the reasonableness condition, or say it's a sort of fail stop or fail safe kind of behavior, because we are not acting on the timeline if the time we are measuring is not compliant with the reasonableness condition. Okay, this is the hardware setup. Okay, an ARM Cortex 512 megabyte of DDR, 4 gigabit so on. That is something that you can buy with you money. In the end, it was 100 euros hardware after that. So, just to say that we are totally but we also try to put something in the real world. Now we take 5 minutes because we are changing completely Next, I will describe a bit from all the concepts that we have seen in the first lectures, how we construct, say, some abstract model, and after that, a SysML, let's say, representation, a SysML profile for system of system, but we did even much more. Then we imported the SysML profile into Blockly. I don't know how many of you use or know Blockly, which is a sort of toy that Google invented for making visual programming. Lorenzo is an expert of Blockly. I mean, it's used for kids in order to teach them, but it's very immediate. We imported this in Blockly, which means that we set up a specific environment in Blockly in which the objects you have are related to the concept of system, and I will show you how we worked out a significant example of a system of system taken from the power grid distribution. Okay, so let's rest a bit. with us for 3 years, and he was working on these things. What is in this pack of slides? Well, first, there is an introduction to model-driven engineering and SysML basic modeling construct that I will completely skip because you know more than I do on these things. I mean, Andras has been spending time, but in this, say, I didn't change the presentation as if it was done, but it was, let's say, instrumental for the introduction of the Amadeus SysML profile. You know that when you use UML or SysML, you have this concept of adapting the language with different profiling for different usages. So we have been dealing with the concepts of systems, and when it comes to system engineering, we wanted to bring all these concepts to a profile of SysML that can help a SysML designer to model and design systems of systems. Okay, this is the main content of this pack. There are a few examples, and then there's a bit of the integration of the SysML profile with Blockly. Blockly is, as I just said, a toy prepared by Google for teaching, or it's very flexible. It's a visual kind of language, and you can express a lot of things. What we did is we imported the SysML profile in Blockly. So we created an instance of Blockly in which the things that you can plug together are concept and construct of system of system. So it's a Blockly for designing system of system, with a set of interesting things that I will leave for later, where, I mean, we will finish today's lecture with a movie, of the full explanation of a relatively serious case study, which has been modeled and analyzed and worked out with this technology. So I skip all these model-driven engineering, notations, SysML kind of stuff. A very quick example, just to an example of a wrong SysML stuff and the better SysML stuff. Okay. How you should avoid this kind of spaghetti style things. Model transformation. I mean, here we have a guy which comes from the place of model transformations. Actually, we started with Patarica. It was 23 years ago, 24 years ago, in applying model transformations. You see, they were different models, but still transformations. And went to UML, and this concludes like this. Now we go for the SysML profile. An introduction, and then how we move from a conceptual model to the semi-formal representation offered by the SysML profile, the different packages, and a few small examples. So what basic concept, we spend some time in describing basic concept. We spend time in the project to try to identify concept, and also we spend time in trying to identify the relationships between these concepts, because you create, say, some knowledge, some model, if you have concept, but you can also relate the concept with each other. So, basic concept, system of system, constituent system, emergence, I mean, clouds in the sky, which we have given a high-level representation of the different parts, and you see here, I will detail, but we have all the links between these different concepts to end up with UML. construct profiles. So driving top down from the concept to the linguistic artifacts. So what is a high-level representation here? We want to explain the relationship among basic system of system concept, and we do it based on the different viewpoints that we decided to use by the beginning. Okay, we had the series of viewpoints also because reasoning based on viewpoints simplifies a lot. Then we have a graphical visualization. Boxes in this representation represents concepts, and arrows represents the semantic relationship among concepts, and there are labels on these arrows in natural language. So you see here, the definition is a system of system is an integration of a finite number of constituent system. This is the system of system. The box represents the concept of the system of system. Here we have the integration, and here we have the constituent systems. Okay, which are independent and operate and so on. And you see here we have also the definition of a constituent system is written, which is a computer system and a human and a controlled object, a physical part. Then the constituent system consists of what I have just said. And this was for system. Here you see these are the different types of system that we can have. There were these 4 categories. And here are, we will see later, these are relied upon interfaces between constituent systems. And then you have Rumi and Rupi. Okay, so we tried to put all the concepts in, let's say, and relate them to each other. When we come to dynamicity, is the property of an entity which is changing in terms of offered service, built-in structure, and interaction. So dynamicity is changing in terms of service, structure, or interactions. And for example, a managed system of system evolution, you have managed evolution and you have environmental changes. And we have the concept of this business value, which is what we are trying to preserve or to improve or to increase with this evolution. Okay. Another viewpoint, dependability, security, and multi-criticality. A critical service is a service of the system that requires specific criticality levels. And you see it here, criticality policy, security and dependability, and so on. And this attached to a constituent system, which is offering service which can be critical. Time and emergence. A clock. We just finished to say what is a clock. Here is the clock. A reference clock, Z, is here. And the physical clock is there, the accuracy, the synchronization, which can be internal or external, and so on and so forth. So if you look this, I mean, you have to look this in some detail, and in the book and the reference you find, you find all the material. I mean, it's not appropriate for me here to put, let's say, to pass through everything that has been done. Emergence. Emergence is a phenomenon of the whole, can be explained or unexplained, is expected or unexpected, beneficial or detrimental. Okay. And so on. Here we have the system of systems, here we have the micro level, macro and micro, and so on. So, we made, say, after the description of all the concepts, we made this abstract level by creating all these connections. And from then, we went to describe all these viewpoints that we have taken in Amadeus in a SysML profile. It's a UML-like representation. We can improve understanding by using different level of abstraction for the different views. We foster information sharing and reuse when we have these things. And we enable analysis and experimentation at very early stage of system kind of genesis or design. Because if I start making SysML or UML designs, I can do, you know, how many different things, useful things that we can do during this process. So, a profile to implement the basic concept and their relationship with a strong focus on this conceptual modeling, trying to capture both static structures and dynamic behavior, organized in the viewpoints, so in viewpoints-driven component. The profile implementation was open source Eclipse, okay, with the Papyrus. And the latest version is accessible over there. Here, just to ease understanding, we have a very small example of a smart grid scenario. We have a distributed energy resource, a smart meter, flexible load, energy management gateway, common display, and DSO is the specific distribution system operator, and finally a coordinator, which is the entity receiving and pricing the energy. So it's a part of the energy grid distribution. The profile is divided into a few packages. There is the Sss Architecture. So in this package, we describe the basic architectural elements of a system of systems and their relationship. Then there is the part related to communication, the system of system interface, okay, describe all the point of integration for exchanging information among connected entities, dependability, security, evolution, dynamicity, scenario-based reasoning, okay, the generation, evaluation, and management of different scenarios resulting from the dynamicity in order to analyze and to understand how to proceed further and to make decisions. Time, multi-criticality, because obviously in a system of systems, not all the services are equally critical. So there are more critical and less critical, and they have to live together. So you have to deal with this. And then emergence, and here we are describing the main element related to emergence. So the high level representation of the structure, from here, there are three profile components: the system of system architecture component, system of system, constituent system, and their types and definition. Then we have the communication components, relied upon interfaces with messages, cyber and still magic, physical interfaces, and then the interface components. Okay, and this is the package. Inside you find all the UML entity that describe these things, and this is the model of that smart grid architecture. If we take the model, let's say, use the construct of the profile to represent exactly these entities. Communication package, again, a message exchange between constituent system of the smart grid. So this is diagrams of the different interactions. The interface package, you see things are becoming more complete and more complex. Evolution. When we deal with evolution, we suppose that we want to change the command display with a new device because now there is a app and we want to see it. Okay. So what happens is that the evolution consists in modifying the SG household to support introduction of new technology, and in this way we are going to maximize the usefulness. Okay, this is the new available technology. This is SG household, the business value, the usefulness, and the new resource, which is smartphone. So we link all these things and we can represent this kind of evolution. Dynamicity. Here we have all the messages exchanges. It's we want to switch on one at a time sequentially from T1 to T7, and in this way we have continuous reconfiguration of the grid, okay, which is disciplining how the different things are done with some, let's say, coordination to avoid that too many things get switched on all together, and this can cause a problem. Okay. Scenario-based package, dependability, security, and time. So this is more or less a graphical representation of all different packages that have been constructed, and in which all the different concept and elements of the architecture devised in the system of system conceptual basis have been first described as concept and relationship, and then taken to a linguistic level. And in this way, the profile provides you instrument to describe systems of systems, guiding and providing the right objects. They are all specialization of UML classes and restrictions. Okay. A static representation of the emergence. A dynamic. You see that when we go to dynamic behavior, we follow the message flow on these things. Say there is a car assembly. Another small example. Okay, a car is made of a prime mover, which is the driver, which decides where he wants to go. So he is a constituent system which can take decisions. And then we have the engine, the steering, the doors, the tires, and this is a design made by using the profile where these are constituent system. This is again a constituent system which is a car, which can be linked to a bigger stuff. The electrical vehicle. The charging stuff is again done this way, and this is the communication between the charging vehicle and the charging station, with also some stigmergic communication. The full model is down here. If you want to connect everything to everything, then you see that the model becomes easily very, very difficult to build. Ants. We try to model with Amadeus also a colony of ants and represent their behavior. Oh, I found food. Going back. I put pheromone on the path, and now this is a highway for ants. The food is finishing. No one depletes pheromone anymore, and the environmental dynamics slowly cancel the highway. Like in here, but in any part, if there is a road and no one is using the road anymore after some 10 years or more or less, depending on the place, the road disappears. Here is more or less the same. Okay, we have these environmental dynamics which takes off the traces of the trail. And this is the model. Football. A match and the players and everything else. Okay, so I didn't want that. I couldn't go into the details of all the profile. I mean, Paolo Lollini is teaching this and takes hours and hours if you want to go into the detail and explain the stuff. But since you have been exposed to SysML and UML stuff, you could have, I think, an idea of what can be inside those diagrams by simply seeing the set of diagrams viewpoint per viewpoint. Okay, what I want to do now is to describe briefly, and then we see the demo, how this system of system profile has been integrated into within Blockly. The SysML profile can be considered as a platform independent model. Doesn't depend on is providing a set of concepts, but let's say does not depend on any platform. So it's completely general. It must be confronted with platform-specific model, okay, which are defined for the specific platform. Now, the profile can be integrated into existing SysML MDE toolchain platform. You can take this profile and integrate in your SysML environment and use it as you wish, still in SysML world. You can do things like analysis of the system, for example, hazard analysis, failure mode and defect analysis, fault tree analysis. I think many of you are familiar with this concept. You can check the compatibility of interfaces. You can try to detect causal loops in order to prevent detrimental emergence. You can generate code. You can make a simulation of our system, and you can also test when you execute part of this system. Okay, so this is very useful. These are the different applications that you can have with the profile. Then this was mostly an idea of Arun Babu. He didn't like SysML, not even UML. He said it's too cumbersome, difficult, very detailed. He was annoyed to use it. So he wrote and contributed to write the profile. I mean, he knew the stuff, but he thought it was not a good instrument, or that we can improve in the usability and friendliness of something like this. So the first time he showed us Blockly, like we were children going to elementary school, just showing how we can use these things. And actually, Blockly is fast. You need a web browser, you link to stuff, and you start putting together things. It's very intuitive. Even, I must say, my son, which is 12, is much faster and able than me in using Blockly. It's for native, digital native people, and is very easily extendable with custom blocks, because Blockly provides a graphical interface of generic blocks, but then you can customize the different blocks and specialize them and so on. You can check constraints, user-defined and predefined, warn the user when the user makes a mistakes during modeling, so drives and helps in doing correct models, and supports XML generation. Once you have described something in Blockly, you can push a button and you have the XML representation of what you did. So, why not? Okay. Then the guys did this job. They customized, since we said it's easily customizable, they customized Blockly for being used for its usage in describing and designing systems of systems. So they specialized all the blocks which were necessary and which were representing the concept and the construct that we had in the profile and in the conceptual basis of the system of system provided by Amadeus. So if you do this and you use Blockly, you don't need to have knowledge of SysML, big knowledge of SysML, any knowledge of SysML, depends if you are really following a completely different path in your engineering process. But you need to have a high-level knowledge about the profile and of the supporting facilities. Okay. Again, you can find the documentation and the free usage of Blockly for systems of systems through this link. So in the overall workflow, you see automatic model transformation. We have a SysML profile. We transform the profile in Blockly. It's an automatic model transformation, right? And then here we integrate it in the Amadeus supporting facilities. You can model using the Blockly for a system of systems. You can do some validation. You can generate code. You can do simulation, get results, analyze the result, adjust your model. So you can model your system of systems in this world, and then you can export SysML or plain UML. And you also can have Python code which can be used and integrated in your model in order to perform executable models directly in Blockly. Okay, so here are also the steps. The designer starts modeling using Blockly here. Model is validated based on the constraints. Executable code is generated in Python and included here. Scenarios are simulated, results are corrected, logs are analyzed for improving, adjusting, correcting, eliminating mistakes, and so on. The instantiated model created using Blockly can be exported to plant UML as an object diagram. Okay. And then you can see these models in using Eclipse, providing this kind of Eclipse plugin. Okay, people are still correcting small bugs and continuing this process, because you can understand that preparing these tools is not something that you do in a day, and there are always bugs to correct and things to improve, but the activities are still ongoing. Then there is a simulator. You can, in a model, execute the Python code, which represents the behavior of the different constituent system. And then you have the interaction as they are planned. And you can see, for example, the messages which are transported between roomies or rupees. You can see runtime sequence diagrams, because you collect traces of these executions. So the profile implemented in the Eclipse integrated environment jointly with Papyrus, but also applicability using Blockly. Now, just to really give you a more precise view of what the people have been able to do using Blockly, I want to show you this video presents an overview of how a key study system or system has been modeled according to the basic concept, architectural solution, and modeling guidelines delivered by the Amadeus project. I think the voice is not sufficient. But I can use this. This video presents an overview of how a case study system or system has been modeled according to the basic concept, architectural solution, and modeling guidelines delivered by the Amadeus project. The Amadeus project. This video presents an overview of how a case study system or system has been modeled according to the basic concept, architectural solution, and modeling guidelines delivered by the Amadeus project. The Amadeus architectural framework focuses 4 different levels of abstractions while modeling and implementing a system of systems. From system of system mission definition to platform-specific code implementation. This demo will focus on the logical level, where the logical model is instantiated, and where the Amadeus supporting facilities has been used in the process of modeling, simulating, validating, and refining the model itself. The goal of the Amadeus system of system case study is the resilient energy distribution, from the high voltage generation, including the medium voltage distribution, involving distributed energy resources as wind or solar power station and energy storages, up to the low voltage distribution to the electrical vehicle owners and the household consumers. The logical model of the case study has been realized using the Amadeus supporting facilities developed in the project and publicly available for use at blockly4source.resiltech.com. The conceptual model in the form of the SysML profile has been preloaded in the tool, and the profile stereotypes are available in the left sidebar in the form of blocks and grouped by viewpoints. The tools allows to connect to blocks only if the connection is specified in the SysML profile. Hint: the creation of a model compliant with a given profile is guaranteed. Now let's open the logical model of the full smart grid system of systems. First of all, we can... Just a second, we try to
set up the output. Changing the sound to with the right button. Yes.
list of system requirements, grouped by viewpoints, is available in the requirements block. Architecture, communication, and so on. From here, traceability information are also accessible, showing which part of the model covers the selected requirement. The Smart Grid system of system model can be explored using a top-down approach, following the represented hierarchy of the system of system. The system of system block represents the system of system level, and its attributes can be specified according to the Amadeus SysML profile. If we are interested in a specific viewpoint, we can select a different viewpoint for each level of abstraction. At this level, let's select only the architectural viewpoint. We can see that the system of system is composed by three constituent systems, called the medium voltage control, the electrical vehicle charging, and the household. Let's open the electrical vehicle charging constituent system. We see that the electrical vehicle charging constituent system is composed by 7 subsystems at the lower level. Let's open the charging station operator constituent system, and let's focus on the architecture and communication viewpoints. We see that CSO has 4 RUMI, 6 services, and 1 critical services for charging reservation of high-priority vehicles. Each service must be exposed by a RUMI. For example, the CSO e-mobility RUMI exposes 2 of the specified services. The first for reserve a charging slot, the second for asking the current schedule for charging operations. Note that in this RUMI is currently monitored by a probe. Probes are used by MAPE monitoring components to get monitored data. Let's enable the MAPE viewpoint. We see that the CSO implements 2 components of the MAPE: monitoring and execution. Monitoring acquires data from probes inside charging points and sends information to load management optimizers, MAPE analysis component in the medium voltage level. The LMO implements analysis and planning algorithms. The planning component sends the information back to the execution module in the CSO. The execution commands the charging points constituent systems, closing the MAPE cycles. Security attributes are also specified at constituent system level. As example, we specified that a charging point needs a secure authentication that must be implemented using a public and a private key-based cryptography. Enabling the time viewpoint, we can specify time synchronization aspects. As example, the property of the local clock of a charging station operator can be specified, as well as the reference clock used for time synchronization. In this case, the CSO is synchronized with a resilient master clock that uses a GPS as external synchronization source and uses PTP as internal synchronization standards. This model can also be exported in several formats, 2 of them directly available from the tool interface, the XML format and the Plant UML format. The tool interface also provides an online visualization of the SysML exported model. Let's open it. As you can see, the SysML representation of the model is huge. This is also a reason why a block representation has been adopted in this project. The tool also generates subparts of the models according to the different viewpoint. For example, architecture, communication, and so on. Using the Amadeus supporting facilities, it is possible to enrich the model or part of it with component behavior and execute the model in a simulated environment. This enables the analysis of dynamics aspect of the system on system at the same time, as well as the analysis of the behavior of legacy components within predefined scenarios. Let's have a quick demonstration on how part of the model described before has been animated, simulating the nominal scenario of electrical vehicle recharging at charging station, and how the intrusion and failure detector component has been tested in experimental testbed using traces of real attack happening in the grid. A common attack that can be performed in an ECT system is the flooding attack, that belongs to the denial of service category. In our case studies, we simulate a flooding attack at the charging station operator. The intrusion and failure detector component logically resides in the A part of the Amadeus MAPE building block, and it uses complex event processing algorithms to detect anomalies that can be caused by accidental or malicious events. In case of the flooding attack, we know that it can be detected by correlating the anomalies in the round-trip time and the number of UDP errors at the transmission layer. In this scenario, we simulate part of the grid, while the intrusion and failure detector will run independently, receiving monitored data from the CSO and LMO simulated constituent systems. Let's now come back to the Blockly4Source tool, and let's load the model used for this testbed. With regard to the previous model, this one also contains executable behaviors of the constituent system used in the simulation. First of all, for our convenience, this time we grouped blocks definition according to their types. Then blocks are referred with a link. We see that a wrapper has been instantiated in order to communicate with a legacy system, or the system under test in this case, using RUMI. The wrapper also contains the code to initialize the communication with the wrapped system. The attacker is simulated as a constituent system that has access to the selected RUMIs and has information to attack injection time. Let's set it to 40 seconds. And this block also contains the code to trigger the attack injection. Services exposed by RUMIs have now a representation of its behavior coded in Python. As example, this service is used by the charging point to start a new charging operation, while this one, exposed by the CSO RUMI, provides free charging slots according to the current schedule. The CSO and LMO constituent systems implements a handshake protocol. Here, the code reads data from stored traces and sends the monitored information to the intrusion and failure detector wrapper. The execution flows is specified using sequence diagram definition. For this demo, we specified an infinite loop and 5 subsequences. Each subsequence is basically a specification of a service request from a source RUMI to a destination RUMI. Of course, only RUMI connected in the model can be selected. The full sequence diagram can be shown in a dedicated window. Let's open it. Here we see the expected behavior. The driver asks to the e-mobility service for a charging slot. The e-mobility service forwards the reservation requested to the CSO that may confirm. If the request is accepted, the connection between the vehicle and the charging point happens. Note that this has been modeled at the physical level through RUPI. And the start of the recharging operation is triggered by the CSO. As we said before, the external intrusion and failure detector is involved in the simulation through RUMI provided by the wrapper. Indeed, the LMO periodically asks to the intrusion and failure detector if any attack happens in the grid. Now, let's hide the sequence diagram and generate the code for simulation. The code can be generated and downloaded by click on this button. Let's download and unzip the file. We have 2 simulator executable files to be run on Linux or on Windows. Clicking on one of the two will open the simulator graphical interface, in which we can simply start the simulation, if we run the simulation from a single machine, or we can specify which constituent system runs in the current environment, in the current machine, and where the simulator registers is located. Let's start the simulator. As the simulator starts, the intrusion and failure detector software is suddenly initialized by the wrapper, and it starts as well. Here we can load rules for detection. In this demo, we used the rule for detecting flooding attack. The intrusion and failure detector interfaces also plots the received packets. The x-axis reports the packet received, while the yellow line is the round-trip time monitored values. Also, all the monitored values can be added to the plot. Now, let's wait for the attack to be detected. Okay, the attack has been activated and detected. The intrusion and failure detector has communicated the detection to the LMO in the simulator, and the execution has been stopped. Let's have now a look to the generated logs. In the simulator log windows, interaction between constituent systems and RUMIs are shown, as well as the interaction with the intrusion and failure detectors. The Amadeus simulators also generates a sequence diagram of the execution trace. Let's open it. This is the sequence diagram of what actually happened in the simulation. Indeed, we can see the nominal execution of charging vehicles and the handshaking protocol with the monitored values sent to the detector. Here we can see the injection of the attack, and after some iteration, the detectors notifies the detection of the attack to the LMO, and the simulation terminates.
Theory can also be some practice, okay? And you have seen these are huge models, but they are obtained through applying the concept, having construct which represent exactly the concept that we have been describing, and you can really design or try to design relatively complex system, because this example is not a trivial one. I mean, they took some time for the guys to model everything, but you also can see that I mean, the software engineering process then is taken to levels in which you can really make analysis, and you can make analyze sequence diagrams and so on and so forth. So this concludes the course, but it concludes the course with the message that when we talk about concept, we have to clarify in our mind what we want to do and be sure that things are consistent and so on. And then we can put these things into practice, and putting them into practice should bring some value in a sense. Okay. So all what I told you is not just ideas and concepts which are there in the air, but have been taken to a more constructive dimension and are practiced also today. I mean, Resitec, which is a company which was partner of Amadeus, is currently using these kind of instruments for their project, industrial project. It's something which is a bit more than just an academic exercise. Obviously, there are still bugs and so on, so they didn't decide to make it a product, but the tool is available for free because it was developed in the frame of a project and is accessible to any person which wants to use it. Okay? Obrigado.